Have you ever thought about what it would feel like if your family and friends all perished in a disaster, and you were powerless to help? €15. This was a complete disaster. My energy was still getting drained to fuel the portal that sung under aura. My hands were tied. There was nothing I could do but watch my family and their friends get annihilated in a pool of possessed beings. Clarence was a fucking coward. To have thousands to fight against 13. It was brutal. Everything around me moved in slow motion. The people. The blood. Flashes of light and energy dancing in the chaotic room. And the deafening sound of bodies crashing against the ground. The crunch of the bones breaking due to the pressure against the floor. It was sickening to say at least. I could see the few giant wolves jumping high and showing off their glistening sharp teeth. Their thirst for blood was evident. They were almost rabid, abiding to their natural instincts to kill. The temptation to sink their razors deep into the skin, to draw blood, to stop a beating heart. But they were careful, controlled, firm and persistent with the rule. You must not kill. Not innocent people at least. However, I didn't know for how much longer that self-control would be able to last. There was salivating for a dead body. They were, after all, werewolves. And that thought alone broke my heart into pieces. I couldn't do anything. Me, a celestial being, son of 2 angels, the harmony and the fallen one, whilst they, simple mortals, were giving their all and fighting like I've never seen alive creatures do before. The ferocity of the scene was mesmerizing. As predicted, we were losing. Terribly so. Aromas ED, Axel and Gabriel were seriously injured. They weren't even fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for somebody else. Something else. The determination and selfless they all had shined brighter and brighter, meaning that their lives were getting dimmer and dimmer. Their light in the distance was close. Midst the mess around them, they still managed to stand up straight, never showing an ounce of fear or hesitation in their suicidal movements, taking hits and jabs until they couldn't anymore, and the timing couldn't be more perfect. Suddenly I felt this massive shift of energy inside me. It was fueling me rather than draining. And this could only mean one thing. Aurora was about to set her foot on the ground. As if reading my mind, the ground started to shake. Little pebbles and debris trembling and jumping like popcorn on a heating pot. Clarence himself started to jump as well, but not due to the moving floor but in excitement instead. He was reaching closer and closer towards the circle of chance, where this ball of white energy kept spiraling into existence. If I squinted my eyes, I could see those satin platinum strands of hair so typical of Aurora. Her dark skin was glowing like an onyx, her perfect figure slowly unraveling from the strands of energy that surrounded her body like a sheet. Some smaller parts of her long hair were beautifully braided with moonstones that captured the eye of everyone. And then she opened her eyes. Those silvery shining orbs of her. She met my eye and I watched as hers widened and in shock at the scene in front of her, before looking at Clarence, who was on his knees in front of her. And I just knew that it was my time to act. Removing myself from the chains that held me back, I moved skillfully through the masses, dodging bullets and many objects, ignoring anything that touched me. I was a man on a mission. Everything around me faded. Only Clarence on his vulnerable state was in my eyesight. I wanted him dead. More than anything. My rage and thirst blinded me as I mustered as much power I could and aimed it at him. All the pent-up anger, frustration and sadness, for all of what he had done. To my mate, to my sister, to my family, to my friends and to the world. For all of the children that were endangered, for all the grieving mothers, for that I know that the blood on Martha's dress was fresh, and its tank of pup wolves, for all the injured men and women that fought against him, for God that stood above whilst doing nothing, and for fate that drew this moment years before I was even born, for the prophecies and myth that surrounded my life, for my life's purpose, verity Ignis. Whatever I had in me, I used it. I aimed it all towards him, but I never saw his fall. I never saw his body hitting the ground. Cold, dead. I never saw any of it because I was too busy feeling my own doing the exact same thing. Trigger warning: do not read ahead if you feel uncomfortable with gory scenes. a long blade penetrating me from my back, going through my body, trespassing my flesh, bones and heart, only to see the tip angling up and ripping more muscles and organs until the blade touched my chin. From my belly button to my chin the movement was incessant, up and down, over and over again until there was nothing else of me but a hole. Nevertheless I smiled. I smiled because I knew I was going to die. The impossible was about to happen and I knew why. Just because I didn't see him fall, that didn't mean that he hadn't. If it took my life to take his, then I would gladly do it over and over again as many times as needed. The oath that I had done with him was blood oath and universal rule. If I took his life, then I would also cease to exist, in the most painful way too. And right now, I couldn't imagine anything more painful than a sword scraping my insides like one would scrape the seeds of the top of a melon slice, scraping the hanging bits of flesh, cutting the long intestines while seeing them leaked all sorts of fluids, the nerves tearing around my bones one by one. And my poor heart had fallen hitting my feet in the ground. Everything felt peaceful. A bright light coming closer and closer. It looked so calm and comforting. I could feel hands in my head, slowly caressing me, lulling me into an inviting eternal sleep. I would finally feel at peace. I would leave all of my love behind. And it was okay. Everything was okay. Until it wasn't. My vision was hazy and blurred, but even my ripped, disconnected heart on the floor pulsated at the sight of a dead man rising from the ground. 51. Jason, it all happened so quickly. 1 sec, and I saw an arrow rushing through the air like an arrow. And then he was kneeling down with the blade trespassing his body in the next. For a few little moments we were all hopeful that his effort and energy had managed to dethrone Clarence of his current position, but we were awfully mistaken. As one man fell, the other rose. His face was completely disfigured. His left eye was nothing but a hole now, oozing blood non-stop, meaning that Nero had still, somehow, managed to hit him and therefore weaken him down more. Clarence was on his own 2 feet, grinning savagely at the dead divination, his eyes shining brightly as if knowing something that we didn't. But his satisfied expression dropped all of a sudden. Despite the fact that there was a battle still occurring, everyone stopped what they were doing to watch the young divine creature take his last breath. Behind me I could hear Charmine hysterical crying, making an unsettling feeling grow inside of me. An angel is crying. Lucifer was no different, but instead of releasing his mourning through tears, he snapped into a blood rampage. The devil had awakened, and it was quite the terrifying sight. But before he was able to do anything, the world suddenly froze. Nobody was moving, and it was not by choice. What is this? What's happening? As if reading my mind, the sky suddenly turned dark, the clouds looking denser and denser, almost opaque. No birds or any other form of life was seen in the air. Just the wind, a strong gush of cold wind that just seemed to get stronger and stronger. And then I saw it. A bright orange lighting bolt roared from the skies, hitting the ground just next to Nero's body. I knew immediately what it was. Rather, who it was. My wolf knew immediately. That energy. To a agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was my mate. It was Castiel. My first instinct was to run towards her. But my body didn't allow me to. Well, she didn't allow me to. For some unknown reason, none of this felt strange or surprising to me. I guess that deep down I always knew. Just not what exactly. But I knew. I tried to yell her name, but just as I tried to vocalize I stopped myself. Her figure was still engulfed in smoke, but I managed to catch a glimpse of her, but I wasn't prepared for the sight. A girl with bright white eyes and a moon mark on her forehead stood crouched on top of Nero's body. Her head was adorned with a pair of majestic horns. They were long and sharp, ribs of orange burning and dancing through said pair of horns. But that wasn't the only thing that shocked me. The 2 enormous wings that surrounded her and her brother also got the best of me. They looked as if they were made of pure fire. They were terrifying to say the least. But the bright aura that her body exuded made me feel more at ease. Her body was covered by a thin vest, it clung onto her just right. tight enough to not fall, but loose enough to allow her to move freely. She looked like an actual goddess. Everything was dead silent, so hearing her words was not hard at all. Not physically, at least. My heartache filled with sadness due to the scene unfolding in front of me. She kneeled next to her brother's body and turned him up, so that his stomach, well, whatever that was left of it, was facing the sky. She looked at him for a few seconds, the light of her eyes dimming more and more until they were normal again. She gently shook his body, as if trying to wake him up from a nap. So innocently she poked him. "Nero, open your eyes." She was smiling while shaking him. "Nero, I have the rose. Wake up." Her smile still prevailed when the tears started rolling silently as she exclaimed excitedly at him. Then her expression fell and she closed her eyes. And just as I thought she would finally break down, an orange light appeared next to her just as a blue one appeared on top of Nero. Slowly the light gained form and then two ghostly-looking children appeared. It was clear of who they were. I've seen them before in the portrait back at Castiel's house. Castiel and Nero when they were younger. A boy and a girl. With every little movement that present Castiel did, so did little Castiel do. Just like Nero, who stood still like his older form. "Nero," they both said in unison. The contrast between the voice pitches sent a shiver down my spine. The acute tone of younger Castiel and the mature version of it both bathing in desperation was something out of this realm. It was unsettling, creepy and incredibly sad. They both tried to shake Nero's bodies, trying to get her brother to open his eyes, but none of them got a response back other than utter silence. Little Castiel rested a black and golden rose on top of little Nero's body and then hugged him while crying silently. Castiel, however, stood still almost as if in a trance. I soon understood why. Little Nero's body was fading, slowly piece by piece. Castiel grabbed her brother's hand in her own and kissed it softly while whispering something that I could not hear. Clutching his hand tightly, she stayed silent for a moment before finally throwing her head back and shrieking in pain and sadness. Her best friend, her twin brother, was dead. She kept on howling in agony, and every little sound and tear that she shed seemed to destroy me on the inside. I could tell that I wasn't the only one feeling her pain. In fact, everyone, even the evil souls in the ground, seemed to hear and feel her melancholy. And then hell broke loose. Just like her father, she turned her pain into hate and she became blind. Thirsty for blood, for revenge. It all happened so fast that I didn't have enough time to process that I was finally able to move. I just stood and watched as she shut down completely and started to rip Clarence's flesh with her bare hands, drowning in nothing but raw hate for the man that killed her brother. Any inch of skin that she could touch, she would pluck. The sound of his nerves getting ripped from his bones made me feel slightly sick. Making lower my gaze for a few seconds while she trespassed his body with her blood-covered hand and ripped his heart out. This was just the tip of the iceberg to the dark side of Castiel Morningstar. She was, after all, daughter of the devil. Inflicting pain onto others was a specialty of theirs. The battle was on again, but no one really dared to move, not after her whole being getting swallowed by a huge ball of light and darkness. The ground was once again shaking, but not like before. Now it seemed like the earth beneath my feet was about to get split into two. The sky was no different. There were lightning and thunder everywhere. No one was safe. I could hear the human emergency alarms going off in distance, turning the scenario into an even more chaotic one. Tornadoes destroyed everything that they could find as the ground swallowed houses and cars. Out of instinct, I turned towards my goddess and terror consumed me as I saw her. The almighty and honorable moon goddess' face was painted with pure fear. And then I heard her yelling to words that I had been hearing a lot lately. "Vertite-en-ignis. 52, Castiel, his body was cold. I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. As I saw myself hugging his equally small cold figure, a rush of energy coursed through my veins. A memory. The rose that I once held. The rose that doomed the both of us. It was coming back in one swift motion, paralyzing my body as I stared at the scene in front of me. It was an unusual cold morning in hell. Mom and Dad were in a meeting somewhere around the castle, but I didn't pay it much mind. I was rather busy running around the halls with my best friend. Nero and I would use our unmastered abilities to spice our traditional games up a little bit. Add a little bit of fire to a game of tag and your speed limits will always be breaking records. Unfortunately, Maria didn't share the same opinion. Little Majesty's no fire in the halls. Come back here, morning stars. Nero and I released a few giggles and proceeded to hide from her. Where did the tiny troublemakers go? Holy hell, they are a pair of little demons. She started mumbling to herself while taking cautious steps towards our direction in the dark onyx stone hall. Nero put his index finger in front of his mouth, signaling me to be quiet. I obeyed and watched as he lifted his hands and started gesturing in a round motion. Suddenly I heard a shriek. It was Maria. My eyes widened as I watched the scene unfold in front of me. In the middle of the hall stood the middle-aged woman spinning around on her place non-stop. Her arms were extended forward, making her look fan, spinning and whirling faster and faster. I couldn't help myself anymore, so I bursted into a fit of laughter, my brother following suit. I remember laughing so hard that my stomach and cheeks started hurting. A good kind of ache. But all good things come to an end. Middle laughing, Nero lost his effect on her, making her have her control back. Oh, you are in big trouble. Come here right now, she yelled while holding onto the side of the wall, trying to get her balance back. Her cheeks were red in fury, and I could have sworn that she had foam coming out of her mouth. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I looked at Might Win in panic and was met with an equally panicked pair of eyes. Without any second thoughts, we took off running aimlessly through the castle, eventually entering the forbidden zone of the castle, or as Mommy would call it, the no zone. I never really understood why, but in that moment it was either exploring the unknown or getting my butt whooped by Maria. It wasn't that hard of a choice, as you can imagine. The castle itself had a dark complex, but for some unknown reason the no zone appeared to be even darker than the rest. The single straight hole that connected to it seemed to get tighter and tighter. But we were 5 years old. There was no such thing as a too tight space. It was strange to look at. Even if it was connected to the rest of the castle through one smaller hole, it still managed to look like a completely separated building, surrounded by a beautiful garden, the Soul's Garden, replete of all flowers known to mankind and beyond. It was colorful and bright, a drastic contrast to the dark, secluded area that it surrounded. In a way, it reminded me of Mommy and Daddy. Mom's aura was bright white and Dad was just darkness itself. This way, Nero pointed towards a heavy metal-looking door. I, however, hesitated. My instincts were screaming at me to not open that door. That danger was lurking. The door itself was scary-looking. It appeared to have some sort of protection device as well as a bounding spell. The more I stared at the door, the more uncomfortable I felt. Castiel, come on. She's nearing us. As in cue, I heard Maria's heavy rushed steps getting closer in distance. I took a deep breath and opened the door. More like, destroyed it. But that didn't matter. Not anymore. The room was small, smaller than I had expected. A only tall, elegant table stood in the middle of it. A curious-looking glass dome rested on top of the table, an intriguing flower standing tall and proud inside of it. It was a rose. I felt this unexplainable urge to touch it, her lifeless golden petals contrasting with glossy-looking dark stale. It was so tempting. Too tempting. Castiel, what are you doing? I heard Nero's voice in the background. It sounded so distant even though I knew I was only just a few steps ahead of him. I don't know, I replied quietly in a whisper. I felt like I was in a trance. Closer and closer to the dome. Close enough to see my own reflection on it. With one hand I cautiously lifted it. With the other I reached towards the special-looking flower. Castiel, no. Don't touch it, Maria shouted as she fighted it got to us. But it was too late. The rose was on my hand, the thorns digging into my skin, but I didn't feel a thing, no. And then everything turned dark. I had no recollection of what had happened in the period of time that I was out. All I know is that as soon as I woke up, all I heard was shouting, and all I felt was a pair of hands shaking me to succumb me of my sleep. Cast I'll wake up, I heard Nero's voice as I felt his warm hands shake me awake. At least let them live until they are adults, so that they can use their powers and outthrone us. Absolutely not. 16 years of life and that's it. Mom started crying uncontrollably and my heart started to race. I opened my eyes and came face to face with my brother's red eyes. He was sobbing while looking at me. Nero, what's going on? I asked, innocently confused and worried. They are going to kill us, Kaz. He cried while clutching my hand. My eyes wide and not comprehending what was happening. I sat up in the ground while holding my throbbing little head. The girl will be sent down to earth. She's most likely to have Charmaine's feminine powers. Those are useful among humans. Light, not darkness. I couldn't even point a gender to it. It just sounded powerful. I furrowed my eyebrows, still confused to what was happening. Mom and Dad continued on arguing with said voice whilst I ignored them. All that mattered right now was twin brother, Nero. He just hugged me close while crying. I consequently started crying too. Death? So soon? It couldn't possibly be true. We've heard and seen humans dying and coming down to the Deadlands and consequently here to hell. All of them with different stories to tell. But all of them had the same ending. Death. I didn't want my brother to die. No, he would never die. Never. We would play fire tag, bake with Maria, and play with Mommy and die forever. We would watch the demons bring in new people and get to know them. It was such a refreshing moment. To hear their life stories and struggles. And visit the 9 circles. Mommy said to not look in there for too long, but it was like humans visiting the zoo. Mom would also play with my hair while telling me about this place called Heaven, where Uncle God lived with my cousins. Mommy told me they were angels. She even told me their names. I hope to be able to meet them someday. But I wanted to do all those things with my best friend. Was life even worth it if I couldn't do all of those things with him? Nero. I whispered, calling for his attention. He raised his head and faced me. His face still wet from the warm tears. His eyes puffy and red just like his nose. I took his pinky and intertwined my own. I promised to be your best friend forever. He looked confused and then got sad again, slowly removing his finger from my own. Until death do us apart. He asked with both of his hands now resting on his lap. I took his hand once again on my own and looked down at ground. No, silly. Not even death will be able to do us apart. I smiled gently at him. A shiny object made itself known from the corner of my eye. It was the golden rose. I grabbed the flower, once again ignoring the thorns that scraped my tiny fingers, and extended towards my brother in an offering gesture. I'll always be with you. I'll always be with you. I whispered one last time as his body started to dissipate in front of me. 53 Vertiti Ignis. Cast Il Morningstar's life was never meant to be normal. Who she was, who surrounded her, her power, her fate. Nothing connected to her would make sense to a simple human mind. Her mission was far too great. The Vertiti and Ignis was far too great. Vertiti meaning power. Ignis meaning fire. The power of fire. Into 1500 S. Luis de Camões, an old poet, a national hero to the country of Portugal, wrote a poem that started like this: Ama fogo que o adecem save love is a fire that burns unseen. I want you to think about this. I can't really force you to do shit through a screen. I can, however, provide you a closure to this story. So let's get this over with. Shall we? Words will never be enough to describe what happened next. It was pure world damnation. It was impossible for any living creature to survive the bomb that Cast Il Morningstar was. So do the math. No one survived to tell the story, not even Cast Il herself. The power exuding from her was far too great for her dual mind and body to handle. She simply ceased to exist. Just kidding. But it was a situation that almost happened. While the ground started shaking, breaking into heart-wrenching earthquakes, breaking the grass and rocks in multiple fractures, while the tornadoes cut through the air taking everything they could see with them, A cold yet brute whisk of wind swallowing whole houses, buildings. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. While the skies fought over sun and clouds, darkness against light, while the world was seconds away from shattering and being destroyed and burned to ashes, Castiel Morningstar stood exuding energy out of her like a motherfucking hurricane, still holding her brother's hand. She was tired of it all. She wanted everything to end. Her pain was far too great to describe. Her best friend, her partner in crime, through hell and back, literally. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. His body and flesh hanging and twisting in ways no corpse should ever do. It was too much to bear. So for the first time, and probably the last, she let it all out. Her frustrations, her sadness, her fears, her responsibilities, everything that she had bottled for the last almost 18 years of existence, finally surfaced and tipped over the brim of the bottle and spilled everywhere. Once again. Literally. There wasn't a single thing that wasn't feeling her rampage in this world. You see, I didn't exactly lie earlier. The power was indeed too much for her to handle by herself. It would, in a matter of minutes, drain and lick every single drop of life that she had left. Castiel Morningstar was going to die. She was going to leave this world and any other possible world forever. There was no place in hell or heaven for her. She would simply become a memory of the girl who destroyed the world, just like other divine creatures. Roderick, take him as an example. Castiel would not be a soul anymore. She would become possibly just a speck of dust. And to say there would be an exaggeration, a hopeful one. If she were to become a speck of dust, Jason Silver would surely slaughter everyone who tried to touch it. Keep it. Own it. He would slice the devil himself if needed to keep the little atom of his beloved. But that would most likely not be the case. Nothingness. And she knew that too. In fact, she could already feel it. The tips of her toes growing numb, feeling nothing. But she was okay with that. In fact, she embraced it. Her fate was to bear the ver to Tien Ignis. Be it summoner. And that's exactly what she was doing. Driven by emotions, her powers flowered all around, creating an absolute havoc. She was summoning the greater power, above every god, every creature, every living and dead thing. Taking a shattered breath out, she entered a complete different state of mind. She entered the void, the nothingness, while spreading on her fire. This was the end. Jason Silver, on the other hand, didn't share the same opinion as his mate. Go figure. Everything around him was a blur, but he could still make out the shape of a booming and blinding light. Castiel. His Castiel. Digging his fingers into the dirty and wet soil. His fingers aching. His knuckles becoming a sickling shade of yellow and white from the amount of force using to keep his grip on the ground, to literally ground himself. Ever since his blood had mixed with Castiel's, ever since he died, something in him had changed. He felt fuller, complete yet anxious, as if he kept a beast inside of him waiting to be awakened. It could be his wolf. Perhaps. But no, it wasn't. And he knew that too. That's why, while gripping the brown spot underneath him, he forced his beast to come to life. One could only imagine his motives. It would be easier for him to just let everything go and die as a hero. For at least being there. Not trying. Just breathing in that place. But that wasn't what Jason wanted. He wanted forgiveness. A new start. He had committed various mistakes. Too young. Too childish and selfish. Too arrogant and full of himself. Too irresponsible. Too many bad things. He owed an apology to everyone. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. In a sense, the complete opposite of Castiel. Everyone owed an apology to her, and he owed an apology to everyone, her included. So in a few last moments of retaliation, he closed his eyes and awoke the thing inside him. And just like Castiel had become a goddess, he had become a god, his eyes shining with pure light exuding from them. And while his mate had an upside-down moon shape in her forehead, he stood turned up, claws extending his fingers, making the grip on the earth firmer, stronger. The earth stopped shaking as he gripped harder. Not suddenly, but gradually. He threw his head back and exhaled deeply, his hot and powerful breath warming the cold and harsh winds, slowing the tornadoes to strong breezes. Things were starting to look better. The rays of sunshine started to burn brighter, his drops of sweat and tears drowning the fires. But just as the world started to recompose itself, he looked at Castiel and got up rushing towards her. That triggered the whole chaos to return. He stood close to her, closer than before, his body tired and giving up as he lied on his stomach, his left hand gripping the earth beneath him once again, and his right arm searching for something that he couldn't yet quite reach. The scenery around him had become a blur once again, but he could still see her. Castiel, he had whispered almost to himself. His word fell on dull ears as expected, the screeching from the winds, the lightning striking the ground, the buildings crashing down to deeper holes inside the cracks of the ground. It was impossible for anyone but him to listen. Even he had difficulty hearing his own thoughts. Castiel, stop. Please. But nothing changed. If anything, the wind blew harder and the earth broke stronger. This isn't the end, Castiel. We can turn this around. Together, please. Nothingness. But he, as ever, was too stubborn to give up. I want to know your favorite color. Her finger twitched a little, but he didn't notice it. I want to know your favorite food. Your favorite flower. Place. Smell. I want you to tell me everything. Quite cliched, and you think. I want to know your fears. Your darkest parts. Your demons. But not those that your father keeps in hell. He let out a bitter laugh at his own joke. If he was about to lose his sanity, he might as well have a good laugh about it. Even if the amusement was a shitty joke. I want to know you, Castiel Morningstar. The real you. Not the version you presented at me and everyone else every day until now. I want to watch you cry. I want to see how broken and vulnerable you really are from carrying the whole world on your shoulders with a smile splattered in your face. A branch of a tree came in his direction, scratching him in the right side of his face, forcing him to close his right eye in pain. I want to watch you come undone. No strings attached to the puppet you make out of yourself, being used by everyone but you. I want to watch you be selfish, be proud, be confident, but above all I want you to be you. His whole body was starting to give up on him. He laughed once again. I'm a liar. She closed her hand into a fist. I don't want to just see any of those things happen. He took a deep breath. I want to be by your side and help you as you unravel. He looked down towards the ground once again as he noticed that nothing had changed. Never mind. Gathering all the forces he had left, he dragged himself just a little bit closer and extended his right arm once again in a rather brute way. His hand dropped. Slapping her own hand, he gripped it. Harder than before. The ground with his left. His love with the right. Harder, harder, harder. He pushed the beast forward once again, stopping the earth, calming the wind, opening the sky. At the same time he could feel her struggle too. They were to equal fighting forces. They just didn't know about it yet. She was fire. He was power. Now battling against each other in a way that no mortal could ever comprehend. I will be by your side, he said, with finality in his tone, clenching her hand impulsively harder. You will never be alone again, Castiel. You have me now. Those words seemed to trigger her, just like her brother. The king of werewolves was claiming to be with her forever. I promise you. He exhaled in pain. She too was in pain. She had just mastered the art of covering it up since a young age. Think of our friends. Your friends. Family. Think about Maria. Think about Carl. Tommy. Everyone here loves you and is here for you. You are not alone. They all love you. He ended up shouting. I love you. His voice cracked as saying those words. I will always love you. He rested his forehead against the ground. You are not alone. feeling the life succumb out of him. In this life or the next, he thought to himself for what seemed the last time, that there was no next life for either of them. He closed his eyes and waited for it. He retracted the beast, no longer putting a fight. His body turned cold as his heartbeat slowed down, getting slower and slower. And just as it seemed that it would be his last pump in the blood coordination machine, he felt the beast come alive once again, pulling him back to reality, to life. The power in him sought out for its other half. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And just like that, the earth stopped shaking, the tornadoes turned into breeze, the fire ceased to exist, the lightning stopped and the sky was clearing, and Castiel collapsed on top of him. For what seemed the 100th time in their short life together, he could feel her tears wetting him. In fact, he could almost taste them, gripping her hair gently. Bringing her face closer to his body, he hugged her tightly as tears shed from his eyes as well. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Castiel," he kept whispering, despite the energy of destruction having ceased. The havoc created by it still prevailed. Everything around them was in ruins or dead. Piles of bodies everywhere, or ample dead, or crushed, or swallowed by the ground. She kept looking around, searching for a familiar face or a sound that would indicate that there was a time of life-led destruction around them. But there was no one, no sound. The pure silence was disturbing and unnatural. It was a ghost city. The only sound was their own breathing, and that seemed to be one of the few only things to keep them sane. "What have I done?" Castiel looked horrified around her. Her wings seemingly lost their glow, and she looked paler, and Kaz kept soaking the scenario around her. He could feel the turmoil inside of her, burning inside of him too. He quickly grabbed his face between both his hands, forcing her to face him, to lock his eyes with hers. "We are going to fix this, okay?" he said firmly while wiping away more tears from her cheeks. He said while kissing the inverted moon sign on her forehead that seemed to tingle and glow when his lips touched her skin. They remained in each other's embrace to help each other overcome the shock of their experience with the almost end of the world. What they didn't seem to notice was that as they kept reassuring each other, loving each other, the ground underneath them had turned green once again, small flowers wishing to bloom in the next spring. They failed to realize that when Castiel stabbed both of them, when she killed both of them, allowing their bloods to mix, she reset at all levels of strength they previously had, connecting now their power together. Their bond was stronger, and as all of the things in the universe ruled by fate, they were perfectly balanced. They were the holders of the validity and Ignis, and they were going to rebuild the world. A new world. A better world. They are now above all the gods and divine creatures. They were about to become the new fate. A fate that would be fair but would give people a choice to draw their own paths, make their own choices, live their own lives, all the while keeping the balance. For she was fire, and he was power, and they would do it together. 54. Power and fire. It has been days. For days, to be more precise. For whole ass days. Walking and sometimes flying around the huge city trying to look for someone. Anyone who showed any signs of actual life. Eventually they would depart somewhere further away, but they had to come with terms about the possibility of their city being transformed into a giant cemetery. Watching your friends, family and people that you once knew, become still, unresponsive, dead. It's not exactly easy. For days, but at least half of each passing day was spent crying and trying to keep each other safe from a mental breakdown. Now wasn't exactly the time to let emotions drive them to make their decisions. They were aware that this somehow wasn't the end. It just couldn't. They were both blessed. Even though right then it felt like a curse. With an infinite amount of power. They were the holders of the validity and Ignis. That had to mean something beyond the obvious chaos and destruction. There has to be. The hardest part was done. In fact, it was done seconds after their moment together. Which was to check if their loved ones were alive. And unfortunately, the response wasn't exactly what they had wanted. No one showed any vital signs. And it was devastating. They both begged. cried, screamed, cursed, but most importantly, they both hurt. They hurt very much in their own hearts. So much that for a few seconds it felt like their ribs would eventuate their beating muscle. And the fact that they could feel each other's emotions didn't exactly help. They were stuck on a loop. A loop made of heartbreak and guilt. It took some time and emotional strength, but eventually they left the bodies behind. It was hard. Very hard. Castiel was still feeding the hope that somehow at least her father would suddenly rise. He was after all the king of the dead and the doomed. Yes, they did check for vital signs. But then again, the devil doesn't exactly own a beating functional heart. How could they be sure that he was dead? They waited and sat down while looking into the horizon. The corpses were already starting to show signs of decomposition. The bodies were slowing, turning grey, and the urge to hurl while looking at the people you cared about the most slowing, turning into dust, was growing stronger and stronger. As Castiel bent over ready to spill more acid. Yes, acid. Because there has not been a single thing entering their stomachs for the past few days. But then again, they no longer needed to eat to survive. Vertity and Ignis, remember? They were divine creatures now. Well, as I was saying, as Castiel bent over to throw up, she noticed the little specks of color underneath her feet, small leaves of grass and the tiniest purple flower blossoming right under her body. And then it clicked. If she could make the grass grow from bland dirt, did that mean that she could bring things back from the dead? A new feeling of hope started to grow inside of her. Sharing her thoughts with Jason, they both decided to give it a try. What's the worst thing that could happen? After surviving the end of the fucking world, they had absolutely nothing to lose. So they sat down and tried to make sense and come up with a way to put their power into work. You see, the problem with magic is that it's really hard to control. Hence why there are so many magic books, and spells and recipes to make things easier for the practice are. They had the power. They just didn't exactly know how to use it. They were slowly feeling their sanity dissipating. The lack of food in their bodies, although not essential, was still able to feed some repercussions, adding a twist of post-traumatic stress disorder and a growing depression. Their minds weren't exactly in the right place. In fact, they were so out of place that in the middle of the most profound silence they started to hear a soft melody echoing through the air. TW disturbing scene ahead, read with caution, dealing with corpses and dead people. And, as every sane person does, they started dancing. Slow dancing, in fact. With each other for the first few minutes. Then started to replace partners. And switching them. Doing enthusiastic and overwhelming dance with corpses. They didn't mind the weight of the unresponsive and rotting bodies. They just wanted to dance with their friends. Twirl around to the sound of a mutual hallucination while dragging soon-to-be skeletons to accompany their movements. Their heavy bodies were slowly starting to release some liquids, leaving a trail of yellow and red underneath them, each step creating a chaotic piece of art on the dirty ground, the blood providing the color, and feet providing the form, as the heavy weight was dragged around the revolted soil, leaving dragging marks all over the place. My, what a sight! Having both attended so many balls and social parties in their distinct lives, they were very much accustomed to ball dance, so their moves weren't that terrible. The complete opposite, actually. They were coordinated, elegant and gracious. Their partners, on the other hand. End of scene. Safe to read. They were only able to break out of this mysterious trance when suddenly a thud echoed through ground. Startled by the noise, they both snapped out of it and recoiled in disgust and sadness for what they were doing. No words were spoken after that. They just couldn't. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience and enthusiasm. Jason just kept watching as Castiel slowly lowered herself down onto the ground and grabbed the book that had fallen from Axel's tear pocket. It was the book that she had gifted him. The one with ancient spells with simple instructions. Kind of like an ancient 101 guided magic book for dummies. Everything was clicking in their heads, and like a thirsty man in a desert attacks a glass of water. They reached for the book, desperate to seek its knowledge. And there it was. Chapter 54, How to Resuscitate a Living Being. Oh, if only things could be that simple. After 5 whole hours and countless tries, they put the book down, realizing that their efforts were in vain. Surely enough, they managed to give the corpses some more humane and alive features. The skin of the dead wasn't as pale as before, but the heartbeat still remained still. No matter how hard they tried, how many times they read the instructions, how many fingers and hairs they twisted and cut, nothing seemed to work. As horrible as it sounded, they definitely didn't use their friends' bodies as experiments. It was selfish, but it was easier to manipulate a stranger's meat and bones than the people they used to talk to and smile with every day. As the rulers of the new world, they shouldn't be sentimental about it. They should have been fair and treated everyone dead or alive equally. But in that moment, that decision protected themselves from themselves. They could not possibly imagine the despair they would fall into again if they accidentally messed up and disfigured a friend's faith. It was already disturbing enough to see them dead, but at least they would try to preserve their physical dignity. As time passed, their motivation seemed to dim more and more. It was useless. They were dead and they could resuscitate them. It was unnatural and forbidden. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, Carthar thanks his unfading patience, enthusiasm. Castiel leaned on Jason's shoulder, who was sitting down in front of a random woman's body, lightly closing her eyes shut with his fingers. What are we going to do now? She asked softly, sadness and tiredness heavy on her voice. I don't know. Just maybe. He hesitated with a sigh, leaning his head against hers. Maybe there really is no turning back. That was what he intended to say, but even if he didn't exactly say it out loud, Castiel understood what he meant. Rubbing her eyes, she lit a frown into on her face. Maybe there really is no turning back. Turning back. She slowly raised her head from Jason's shoulder and looked around, searching for something, and once she saw it, she rose TP her full height and started to walk towards it. Jason wasn't oblivious to it, so he asked, "What are you doing?" His tone was not harsh, just concerned. He was after all watching his soul rummaging through dead bodies, pushing away the ones that would get in her way like sacks of potatoes. Only when Castiel pulled out a black-covered notebook with a golden stamp on top of it did he understood. Aroma's E's journal. Castiel wasn't exactly confident about this, but something awoke inside her mind when the words turning back crude through her brain. Who knew more about the Verta TM Ignis other than its holders? Aroma's She remembered the time that the whole power had been transferred to her. Aroma's ED went to visit and check in with her about what new possible powers would awaken within her. They were all just guesses, but all of them were right. Every suspicion that Aroma's ED had, every single one had been proven correct, and they were all written down in his journal that he seemed to carry everywhere. That same journal could be the portal out of this nightmare. She didn't exactly know how, but she had a good feeling about turning back. Her time-manipulating abilities back then allowed to freeze time. The possibilities now that she was not alone were simply endless. Meticulously turning every yellowish page, she immersed herself in Aroma's ED's theories, and what she found left her speechless and hopeful. All she had to do was to believe in herself, and that's where Jason would play the part. To build her strength, she would teach him how to do it, and he would teach her about being confident about it. They would make it work. Together they would go back to the past. And so they did. A gush of strong white wind surrounded them both as they held each other's hands. Different spirals of colors and orbits rushed through their minds. Their souls, their whole beings were being transcendent through time and space. The complete wreck around them was rewinding at the speed of light, causing them both to feel extremely light-headed to the point of becoming completely numb to the cosmic around them. Time kept going back and back and back and back. Neither of them really knew when to stop. When was the defining moment? The breaking point of all the tragedy? At birth. That sounds like a poor self-deprecating joke. Enthusiasm, in the middle of the battle. Kill Clarence and move on. But what about Nero's bond with him? He would die too. Nero, Nero. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The day that Clarence made his offer to Nero, Castiel didn't need to say it out loud or even move for Jason to understand. They were connected now, to souls intertwined, sharing their thoughts and communicating through telepathy. They both were the holders of the £EM-Ignis after all. £EM-Ignis was going to be another mystery amidst all of this. What was going to happen? If they were going back in time until the moment that Nero solved himself to Clarence and stop him from doing so, then that would mean that he wouldn't pass his half of the power to Castiel, and she would share it no longer with Jason but with her brother instead, as it was supposed to be. But then again, what would happen next? How could the new world be rebuilt if she was not sharing her greater power with her soulmate? However, they didn't have more time to think about this, because as they finally opened their eyes, they found themselves in the middle of a busy street, a car almost running over both of them. They only acted out of impulse and dodged the car while walking away, hear the honk going off angrily, the sound getting more distant by the second. It's safe to say that they were in shock, not only for being almost ran over, but they surely got emotional when they saw the amount of people surrounding them. The noise, the music, a bustling city. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Never in their lives did they think they would get relieved by the thought of a car running them over. But none of that was important. Their target was, and Nero was just turning around the corner. He was looking down onto the ground, a sad atmosphere surrounding him. His eyes never drifted from the grey pavement underneath him, as if looking up would physically hurt him. And even though Castiel hated seeing her brother upset, it surely was better than seeing him dead with his heart tripped and thrown to the ground in front of his corpse. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She couldn't help herself and ran towards him, engulfing him in an intense and emotional hug. She hugged him so tight and started crying that she actually tackled him into the ground. Castiel, what the hell are you doing? People can't see me. You look absolutely crazy. What the hell is wrong with you? He hissed at her whilst still in her embrace. He had been sad before and now was feeling slightly annoyed, until he saw her tears falling down her cheeks. Cass, what happened? What's wrong? He said worriedly while trying to grab a decent hold of her to keep her stable. I love you so much, Nero, she replied while hugging him once again. And somehow he understood. Not the whole situation, but he understood, and accepted her love and appreciated it. Things weren't exactly easy. He had just found his soulmate, but Allegra also told him that it would be too dangerous to turn himself human. He was devastated, though despite the circumstances, hearing his sister remind him how loved he was, uplifted his mood. Mythical. They were twins after all. While all that happened, Jason looked at Castiel crying and hugging her in a distance, trying to figure out what was happening. It all made sense as soon as he heard the name, Nero. She was hugging Nero. She was able to see him. He could not. And that meant that the £EM-Ignis had returned to its original owner. The thought made Jason feel rather empty on the inside. Not necessarily sad, just empty. Eventually Castiel pulled her brother towards a vacant place, Jason following her, and the three of them sat down and tried to explain what had happened. At first Nero was hesitant to accept the truth, but as soon as Jason started to describe, from his own perspective, what felt like to hold such an intense power inside him, Nero started to believe them. And after all, why would his sister lie to him? They all agreed to let Nero retake his previous route and allow Clarence to introduce himself to him. As a person of supernatural status, Clarence could also feel Nero's spiritual presence, not see him as Castiel could, but just like he could summon demons, he could feel them, and the roles went as predicted. They had seen the now future, so they automatically had the leveraged hand. It was their mission to change that. Clarence made his offer and gave Nero time to think about it before giving him a definitive answer. Clarence didn't predict, however, that instead of being consumed by heartbreak and envy, Nero would be loved and supported by his sister to convince their father of Clarence's intentions. Sitting down next to the devil never really gets easy, no matter how many times you do it. So while Nero and Castiel fall on Lucifer with information, Jason sits still whilst nodding his head respectfully. Aramazid kept writing and taking notes of everything. Unlike Nero, Lucifer didn't doubt the story in the slightest bit. He had been suspicious of Clarence as responsible for random demonic possessions, and hearing his daughter speak so sure of herself, feeling her slightly traumatized but incredibly mature, he had no important questions left. He was going to kill Clarence, without wasting any more time. As of lately, that concept had showed itself as important. Aramazid thought to himself whilst keeping his stance neutral to the whole situation. So, in a matter of seconds, as Lucifer raised his hand towards the sky and clenched his hand in a fist in front of him, Clarence's body started to appear in the middle of the room. Little by little, he was kneeling by Lucifer's feet, one knee resting on the ground while the other respectfully propped up and his head lowered to the ground as every other creature summoned by the devil should be. How educated of him, to keep a mask of dull respect for the ruler of hell, while secretly trying to dethrone him and become the most powerful creature in this world. Fucking rat. And Lucifer hated rats. Clarence, feeling more presences in the room, took a peek and his eyes bulged out of his face as he was Castiel and Jason looking at him with fire of hatred burning their eyes. It all made sense to him as soon as he felt Nero's presence. That little shit, Clarence thought. Think about this, Nero. Do you really want to die alone? He tried to irk the youngster. Before anyone had time to react, Castiel slammed Clarence's body towards the nearest wall. Shut the fuck up, you monster, as she slammed him hard again. Against the wall. Beef slams his head, my brother slams his head alone. And she slammed his head once more before letting his body fall to the floor and turning around to look at her brother. Everyone was. Nero was conflicted, his face expressionless, making everyone worry about what he could possibly be thinking. Clarence saw that as an opportunity. Allegra won't help you. You know that, he whispered while looking at Nero in the eye. Didn't I tell you to shut up? Castiel yelled, frustrated with the whole situation. Clarence, being fueled by anger and hunger, quickly grabbed Castiel and held a holy blade against her throat. Ignoring the woman he held hostage, he continued to speak towards Nero. I'm the only who can help you, Nero. Trust in me, he said with a crazed look swirling his eyes. A big smile spread on his lips, numb to the pain of Castiel's efforts to get out of his hold. He was bleeding, but the special blade against her throat stopped her from doing anything too drastic. Lucifer, on the other hand, was completely furious. Rage was consuming him more and more each passing second as he looked at his daughter being submitted to danger by a lunatic that had previously worked for him. The flames were licking him higher and higher, burning him with skull-hot white fury. Castiel remembered the last time she had seen her father like this. It was once again, right after he found out about Clarence, and she especially remembered the words he professed after. Clarence is mine. No one else will be able to do it. No one else knows how to do it. You need me. Clarence kept going, almost foaming from the corner of his mouth. You see, that's not necessarily true. Aramazid finally interrupted the whole charade. And, as he spoke his words, Castiel finally managed to unbalance Clarence and struggled to turn the blade against his own throat. However, none of that was necessary as Lucifer appeared behind Clarence in a flash and twisted his neck to the left, instantly killing him, then proceeded to store his soul to torment later. What mattered right now was to burn his flesh to make sure that the motherfucker didn't find a way to come back. Castiel was taking short, rapid breaths as her heart kept palpitating out of her chest. The only thing being able to relax her physically was the embrace that Jason had managed to quickly put her in. She looked at her father in the eye and muttered a thank you, while grabbing her throat. I told you he was mine. And just like that, her heart rate went up again, making Jason hug her even tighter, pulling her into him, while she stared from over his shoulder to her father, who had a knowing glint sparkling on his iron smirk. But that expression disappeared as soon as it appeared, gaslighting her into thinking that it was all her imagination. The only thing being able to pull her back was Nero's voice as he talked with honors ED. "What did you mean? Can you help me?" His tone full of hope. "Me no," he shortly replied as he turned his body towards Cast IL. "But he can," Obama's ED revealed as he used his index finger to point towards Jason. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Milban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The transference. You will pass the vertitium ignis to him. Then you will severely weaken. Your powers might come back, but only those that belong to you with or without the vertitium ignis. The ones that are natural to you. Inhumane strength. Or a reading. The basics. Much like a human but with spiritual awakening in a way. You were cursed to become the light ghost because you were responsible for the vertitium ignis. Removing it from you will also relieve your curse," Obama's ED explained. "And since you have apparently done it before," he continued while looking at Jason in Cast IL. "You know, the couple who came from the future. It should work. From what I've heard, no curse was passed upon Jason after he received the power." It was true. A moment of silence fell in the room. Even though it had already been done, it was still a big decision to make. "Nero, what do you say?" Lucifer asked while looking soberly at his son. It saddened him to know that his son would not be as involved in the supernatural world as he had hoped. But it also filled him with joy to know that his son would be free from his curse and be able to follow his path in life with his soulmate by his side. Besides, the power wouldn't be falling into bad hands. He might not be a fan of Jason because he was dating his daughter. He still knew that he was worthy of it. The kid had grown. Immensely so. No longer a spoiled brat. It was time to give him a chance and keep the world in balance. Everyone looked at Nero expectantly. "I will do it." And thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.